Let's turn to business news now with our business editor, Giles Beckford, who sits, I think, in the Wellington office not too far from Patrick. Is that right, Giles?
He's done a runner. He's been and gone.
Yeah. Is he? Well, look, I'm fascinated by this because my notes say we are going to discuss speculation that there is an announcement due on the future of the Reserve Bank Governor, Graham Wheeler. Is that the case?
Well, the word we hear from inside both Parliament and the bank, and it's percolating around financial markets, is that there will be an announcement before next Thursday. That will be the first monetary policy statement from the RBNZ. Clearly, they want to actually lay it out pretty early in the year as to whether the governor's going to carry on and seek a second term, or whether in fact he'll be granted a second term, or whether in fact he's just going to be a one-term governor. The word we hear, and I think the speculation is largely that he will not get a second term, will not want a second term. We won't speculate on whether he's been pushed or whether he would jump, but frankly, he's had interesting times, as the Chinese would say, for his 5-year term. You remember he came in here with New Zealand just recovering from a recession. We had the Christchurch earthquake and the aftermath of that, and the scramble by government and authorities to try and rebuild the city and get it back up and running. At the same time, we had the rest of the world really not going very far. The international growth outlook wasn't that good, but then we had a boom in dairy. And you remember we rocketed up to almost lifetime highs in 2013-14. There was the dairy boom there. That was looking good. And he thought, because remember the Reserve Bank governor's job is essentially to keep inflation within a 1 to 3% target band. Right? 2% is the magic number that they aim for. Well, like the rest of the world, New Zealand, in fact, had very low inflation, but he thought that with the economy starting to pick up pace, that there would be stronger inflation pressures, and he started to raise interest rates. Central banks do this. They try to be a bit preemptive. They take the initiative to try and just keep a lid on inflation so it doesn't get out of control, and it comes back to bite you in the bum a few years later because you weren't quick enough. But then, of course, the rest of the world was going soft. Dairy boom became a bust. Oil prices fell. Inflation wasn't just low, it was actually missing in action. So he had to cut all those rates, all the rate rises that he gave, he had to take away, and he had to cut rates. So certainly a bit topsy-turvy. He's been criticised for the way he communicates. Because he's a reasonably low-profile governor, he seemed at one stage to say, well, we won't be cutting rates. And then, of course, the very next week, that was precisely what he did, and that drew a lot of flack. And the government, usually ministers do not comment on the performance of central bank governors. But if you remember, Bill English as finance minister, John Key as prime minister, both commented on the way the Reserve Bank was, should we say, approaching the task of getting inflation back into the target band and the effect it was having on the wider economy. That's quite unusual. So put all those things together, and I think that possibly Graham Wheeler will say, well, it was a salutary, an interesting 5 years, but that's it. And the government can announce that it's now on the hunt for a new Reserve Bank governor.
Yeah. Look, I was at one of the stand-ups where John Key had it, I think probably a bit of a go at Graham Wheeler, relatively speaking. And of course, the government was coming under immense pressure on housing then and was looking to blame sort of anyone they possibly could. So Graham Wheeler, the Auckland Council, the Resource Management Act, everything was copping it. But it was unusual to hear Graham Wheeler singled out like that. Who would replace him if he does go?
Well, the practice in the past has essentially been to find somebody from outside, a New Zealander, but somebody from outside of the bank. Look inside the bank, first of all. There are a couple of quite suitably qualified, reasonable potential candidates. These Grant Spencer and Jeff Baskand, who are the two deputy governors. There's the chief economist and assistant governor, John McDermott, who's a former chief economist at what was the old National Bank of New Zealand. Looking outside of the bank, you'd have to say the short odds favour Adrian Orr, who's a former chief economist at the bank and deputy governor, but he's the one who currently heads the New Zealand Superannuation Fund. I'd have to say that I don't know whether he wants to take a big pay cut, because that's what he would have to do from his current position. He would be a breath of fresh air. He would be a central bank governor as we have never seen before. And I say that from personal experience, from dealing with him over many years. Other potential candidates, Rod Carr, he's a former Deputy Governor, and Murray Sherwin, who's currently heads the Productivity Commission. He's a former Deputy Governor as well. So they're potential outside candidates. They've been out, they've been through something different. They might want to bring somebody back in. I would say the long odds are that they look overseas. Now, they could actually go and just find somebody different, completely unknown to New Zealand, but with good credentials. That's a possibility, but I think that might be just a step too adventurous for the government and the bank at board.
Thanks, Charles. Quickly, before you go, the markets today.
Top 50 index, the share market still feeling the effect of the Monday night massacre with Donald Trump, down 35 points at 7,051. New Zealand dollar 72.9 US cents and 96.3 Australian.
Charles Beckford, our business editor.